I'm really excited about this session and so appreciative of you all joining. This is going to be a presentation of a partnership and two organizations that are very different that have come together around a common purpose. I'm joined by my Propel America co-founder, Paymon Rouhanifard, both of us having been superintendents. He can introduce himself in a second, as well as Nivine Megahed, the president of National Louis University, with whom we are also very, very pleased and honored to be presenting today, but more than that, to be partnering in the work that we will describe today. So with that, why don't I pass it to you, Nivine, to give an introduction as to who you are and why you are here with us today, and then Paymon and I can share a little bit about our stories as well.
Sure. So thank you all for joining, and so happy and pleased to be here both to talk about the partnership and to share what we're doing. I am Nivine Megahed, as John said, and president of National Louis University, and you may wonder why a university is working on this sort of upward mobility credentialing project, and I think it's this recognition that today's learners need a variety of paths to both achieve economic mobility as well as economic stability in their lives. And so we just think that we have to rethink how education is delivered to individuals, when they need it, where they need it, and how they need it. And we're delighted to be working with John and Paymon and their organization to help bring that to reality for hopefully pretty soon thousands and thousands of students across the country. And pass it back to you, John.
Great. Well, I'll pass in a minute to Paymon, but as Nivine asked the question of why would a university be here talking about a kind of career and technical education pathways initiative, I think there's probably a fair question: why are two K-12 superintendents here talking about a higher education issue? And our belief is that it's the juncture of those two systems where too many kids that we saw coming through the school systems where we were superintendents are falling through the cracks. And for us, it's for those kids who have done everything we've asked them to do in high school, who graduate and do not have a clear path forward, that we launched this initiative together, and that we enhanced this initiative by partnering with National Louis. Paymon?
Hey everyone, Paymon Rouhanifard, co-founder and CEO of Propel America. And John captured it well as far as someone with my background spending the last 10 years or so doing district work. John and I were co-workers in the Department of Education, and I was superintendent of Southern New Jersey in a city called Camden. And what John said is the reason we do this work. We saw scores of our graduates, in spite of the improvements that happen inside the four walls of classrooms, right? Improved graduation rates, improved test scores, reductions in suspension rates. We saw them flounder. Those trends did not translate to a system of income mobility. And we see this with the majority of those graduates who enroll in college stop out with debt and little additional earning ability as they enter the labor market. And so, that is a tragic and daunting realization as we consider there are 36 million Americans today who have some student loans but no degree to speak of, and 4.4 million 18 to 24-year-olds who are not working or in school. And so we realize, as Nivine said, we need to rethink the structures of workforce and higher education so that every young person in this country can access an affordable pathway to a good first job with on-ramps and off-ramps to a choice-filled life. And so we're just really excited to talk to you all about our partnership and our work here today. So just to jump right in, a little bit about Propel. We're a nonprofit. We're a young nonprofit. We're just under 2 years old. And our mission is quite simple. It's for recent high school graduates, 18 and 24 years of age, to get a good first job. That is a springboard to upward mobility that comes with ongoing planning for higher education and career advancement. And currently, we are working to place those young adults into credentialing programs. And these are industry-recognized, employer-driven programs in healthcare, IT and engineering, advanced manufacturing, and the skilled trades. And we're doing this currently in 4 states with ambitions to scale further. We started in Louisiana and New Jersey, which is where John and I spent our prior parts of our career in education. And we've since grown into Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So let me pass it over to Nivine to share a little bit about NLU.
And well, National Louis is a private non-for-profit institution that was established back in the 1800s. It is an institution that from its inception has been focused on educational equity and innovation. Probably most notable in the last number of years was our establishment of an undergraduate college that was re-engineered to be highly affordable for students and really focused on serving some of our most underserved students. And in fact, it is the work that happened in that college that really stimulated our interest in the work that we're doing now with John and Paymon. As we learned that so many of our students who are underserved, not only do they sometimes have that issue coming out of high school, not knowing what path to go on, but even if they do know the path and it is an affordable path, it still doesn't lead to economic stability and upward mobility fast enough. People just can't afford oftentimes to be waiting 4 years to get their first job to move them forward. So the idea of being able to build stackable credentials across their educational lifespan, which drives immediate economic stability for us, was very compelling. And our institution sees that as right in the sweet spot of doing our work that drives equity and mobility on behalf of our students.
Yeah, well said. And so let's talk a little bit then about the concept that we're here to propose to you today. And as Nivine was getting to, it's not going to be a conventional higher ed model, but it's also not going to be a just straight jobs training program. And so before we get into what it is, let's lay out exactly what the challenge is that we're responding to. And as both Paymon and Nivine have said, at its core, the challenge is that the transition from high school to college, and ultimately the experience that young people have being trained and educated after high school, is simply not meeting their needs. It's not meeting their employment needs. It's not meeting their financial stability needs. And ultimately, it's not organized around the needs of the actual consumer of the service in many, many cases. That's not to say that there aren't millions of kids who are having a great experience in the American higher education system. It's also not to say that it's impossible to go directly to work and go through a credentialing program that's not via a university or a college. But it is to say that for a huge percentage of kids who have done everything we've asked them to do in high school, for whatever reason, their experience after high school simply isn't working to generate the fundamentals of a successful career in adulthood. And you see this bear out in statistics that are only going to get worse as the kind of silent elephant in the living room of the recent high school graduates amidst the pandemic makes its way through our system. Unemployment rates for recent high school graduates have always been high, even in a tight labor market, and they're only going to get worse. Disconnection of young adults from educational institutions and employers has been high. It's going to get worse. And if you need evidence of why it's going to get worse, just know, quite obviously, that reports indicate that half of all recent high school graduates have had their post-secondary plans altered by virtue of the pandemic. All of this indicates a kind of wayward path ahead that has always existed. It's always been there for many, many high school graduates. But there are two things that have changed today. One, we are graduating more kids than ever before from our high schools. And in a sense, the kind of dropout crisis that we all used to talk about 10 and 20 years ago has now really become a post-high school dropout problem, not a pre-high school dropout problem. And second, of course, is the pandemic. It is that now that kid who did everything we asked them to do in high school and is now graduating into a labor market that's not as advantageous for job seekers, and into a higher education environment that must perform and must serve their needs if they're therefore going to get a toehold in the economy. We're trying to create a solution to this fundamental economic problem for millions and millions of young people, and that's what we're here to propose to you today. Paymon?
So we believe that high school graduates are currently facing a false choice. You're either forestalling income and accruing debt in pursuit of a traditional degree, or you're forestalling education and mobility to go work in an entry-level job with limited opportunities for advancement. And so when you break it down, traditional workforce today has a stigma, and probably for good reason, in that these are not always living wage jobs, nor do they interact with the current higher education system. One can't just leave with college credit during that experience. And traditional higher education, as Nivine knows better than we do and has stated quite well, there have been significant challenges with affordability and connectivity to the labor market. And so we believe that there is a third way, and that it doesn't need to be an either or. It's fundamentally a both and solution, which is as simple as young adults, particularly low-income young adults, need an affordable pathway to stability, a quick pathway to stability that also involves college, comes by way of college credits, and creates those on-ramps and off-ramps to pursue other rungs on a career ladder by way of continuing education. Nivine.
Yeah, and there's several issues that we see as critical in this process. One is to make sure that students, whatever learning takes place for them, counts towards any other credentialing they want to pursue, up to and including associate's and bachelor's degrees. Two is making sure that we put things together that are convenient and manageable for them and affordable. And the third is making sure that we're really linking the credential with the needs of the employers, and really, from a higher ed perspective, designing the credential to meet the needs of the higher ed employer, or to meet the needs of the employer. And if any of you work in higher ed or have tried to work with higher ed, you know that that is not an area that typically higher ed executes on very quickly. But we're finding that if we really are to achieve that dream of upward mobility and economic stability, that the onus is on us to ensure that the curriculum and the support for students is very well aligned with the needs of those employers, so that students become work ready very quickly with the credential that we prepare them for.
So there are three phases in our model. The first involves two starting points. One being a second semester high school course one takes, and the other being a boot camp, which is the same curriculum, but for 18 to 24-year-olds, condensed into a 2-week format. And the short of it is, this is an opportunity for young adults to begin career navigation and exploring these industry-recognized credentials and career pathways in their local economy, and also beginning to build some professional skills that will allow them to be successful in those jobs. Then students more formally apply into the program, and that is when they earn their industry credential. That's when they enroll in National Louis University and enroll in a certified medical assistant program. And during that time and through job interview and job placement, our organization, Propel, provides regular coaching and wraparound support services, while on a weekly basis as students are taking their coursework online. So it is a blended format that is complemented by that individualized coaching, and that goes through job placement for the first few months. And so just to build on that three-part process, our role in this partnership is to do the on-the-ground student recruitment by way of high school partnerships, by way of community-based organizational partnerships to enroll students into the boot camp. And we then coach students on a weekly basis and to steep them in those professional skills they need to be successful. And it's critical to call out, the coaching structures are geared to ensure that students, we are helping them break down any friction as they're on their journey to complete their credential and to interview and get placed into the job. And this comes by way of cohorts, which are pathway specific. So you're in a cohort of 12 to 15 other, we call them our fellows, which is facilitated by a trained coach. And you also get one-on-one mentoring from that trained coach as well, to again, ensure that those skills are there to get the job, to persist in the job, and to have a plan once you're in that job for ongoing education and career advancement.
And from our perspective, we do, first of all, the development of the curriculum, which we deliver virtually and online to students. And the coaches then help to reinforce that, and as well as develop the other life skills that students need. We obviously provide the support for student financial planning and any grants and financial aid that they're getting. We provide the faculty and academic support that they need through the credentialing process. We engage with the employer on a couple of fronts. One is to ensure that the internship experience, which these students all go through, is well aligned and integrated with the academic experience. And the other side is, of course, upfront to ensure that the curriculum we're designing is aligned with their specific needs, so that we're preparing students who are, or fellows who are ready for the jobs that are available for them. And as you can imagine, while we have distinct roles, we have to work collaboratively at every phase, because we're sharing the student with a shared purpose to get them ready for successful transition into employment.
Yeah, and so building off of that, and Nivine mentioned both of them, the employer really plays two obvious but unfortunately rarely executed roles. First is to be intimately involved with the development of the curriculum. And I cannot emphasize enough, for reasons that are unfortunate, but perhaps explainable. And there's a lot of blame to be passed around on all sides, in my view. There's not great trust between commercial employers and the education system writ large. There's certainly not the faith that typically just a education-based training program is all that is needed to gain one and make one eligible for job within a private sector employer. So we have to bring employers in order to design the curriculum so that we build that level of trust. But secondly, they need to be responsible stewards of our people. I mean, if they don't understand our graduates, if they're not invested in them, then our graduates aren't going to be successful. And so they need to be a partner themselves on the other side of this as we continue to support these fellows once they're hired by, for example, the partners that you see in front of us. And I should say, we started in healthcare for many, many reasons, this particular partnership with National Louis. But the mission orientation of hospitals, the respect that industry commands, its stability during times of economic turmoil, all make healthcare a great place to start. And we wouldn't remotely be where we were with this project or just as an organization were it not for the organizations that you see in front of you here today. They are the essential partners and really the animating energy behind the model.
So what does that mean for one of our students? This is Freddie Pereira, and Freddie is a student from Camden. I actually knew him decently well when I was superintendent, so it's really special for me personally that he's a part of the Propel community, and he is currently working as a certified medical assistant at Cooper Hospital, which really is an anchor institution, to John's point earlier, in Camden, and a great partner of ours. And when you think about the pathways he has available to him, we use the term, I've used the term a couple times already, choice-filled life. And so that can come off as a bit of a hollow platitude, but for us, we're making this very, very concrete. And so Freddie can take a linear career pathway within the healthcare sector and climb the rungs of the Cooper ladder and get his associate's degree and become a licensed practical nurse, and then get a bachelor's degree, a BSN, to become a registered nurse. Alternatively, Frankie, I said Freddie, Frankie may say to himself, he may not be all that interested in the longer term in a career in healthcare. He may enjoy his job right now, which is actually as much admin as it is healthcare in terms of clinical work. But he knows he wants to pursue a future degree. And so while he is serving as a certified medical assistant, he can continue on at National Louis and get, say, some other major, a general studies major, and an associate's or bachelor's degree. Thirdly, he could just pivot and move into a different credential altogether. And so medical coding is a significant need for Cooper Hospital. And so it's at a bit of an adjacent field, different opportunity, pays more. And I think what we find so compelling about this partnership for our students is that under one institution's roof, their credits can articulate neatly and cleanly as they climb the ladder and pursue future credentials and future degrees. And you can't overstate how important that is for our students, because on the ground, with sort of the status quo and working with community colleges, and we do have community college partnerships as well, but navigating the transfer system to go from a workforce NGO or community college to then a 4-year degree program, oftentimes those credits don't transfer. It's a very burdensome process. And so this is what it means for Freddie to live a choice-filled life, and we're just incredibly excited about it.
So I'm going to ask Nivine and then Paymon to talk a little bit about the future, but you can see here where we're going with this. We just completed a pilot. I think fair to say that every indicator from the pilot that we completed in the regions that Paymon described earlier was more successful than we ever could have imagined. I think that's true on both sides, and that at least initial indications are that this blended model, this model that is neither simply a college completion model nor simply a jobs training program, but borrows from the better traditions of both, that this model can work. And at the same time, it's worth acknowledging that our goal of 4,000 by 2025 is a very small contribution to an incredibly large problem across the country, which is the absence of more of these structures existing. And so our goal is not just in a sense to do something good for 4,000 individuals, but it's to prove to our respective K-12 higher education and private sector employment partners that this is the type of structure that can be and should be in place across the country. Nivine and Paymon, you run these two organizations. So starting with Nivine, if I could ask you to tell us a little bit about where we go from here, and then we'll look forward to questions and answers and discussion with our friends in the audience.
Yeah, so from here, our goal is to develop as many of the credentials as we need as quickly as possible, so that we find great jobs for young adults who need that kind of economic stability and mobility. I'll also add that, so John, you made some comment about the mistrust between employers and higher ed. What's interesting is what we're learning as we proceed with this is that when we go to employers and talk to them about aligning curriculum, how quickly you gain trust, because it's so shocking for them to have people come to them and say, we'll work with you and we'd like you at the table with us to put this together the right way on behalf of students. So I think there's something really important here that will define the future paradigms that are available to individuals as they pursue credentials. And I also think the other important piece is for us to stop thinking so discreetly, that I think there's so many different paths for young adults, that as long as we're aware that our key commitment is to get that kind of economic stability and mobility started for them, the rest becomes easier to design around if that's what you're trying to achieve. So I think that the future looks bright, and I'm really excited about where we can go with this. I'll turn it to you, Paymon.
Not a whole lot more to add. We're excited to hear y'all's questions. Just to say, we are doing this work because we felt that there's a dramatic void right now. And for 18-year-olds who are looking to make that transition, the system has been failing them fundamentally. That transition point is daunting. For low-income young Americans who need economic stability, there are very, very few options. And so while we're serving a wider range of ages, up to 24, 25 years old, our system has fundamentally been falling short for our most marginalized citizens of our country. And so we're really excited to build what we think is a third way solution. It's not vocational ed or 4-year diploma only. You can bring both together into a more unified system of workforce and higher education, and we're just incredibly thrilled to be doing this work together.
Well, thank you. And I think we're going to move now into a discussion phase, and with a lot of gratitude to all of you for being here, and in particular, of course, to my co-presenters. So thank you very much, and let's move into a discussion. Lily, I believe, are you going to, oops, looks like we're starting to get some questions here. First question from Adriana, thank you. Could you talk a little bit more about what you are hearing from employers on the impact of the pandemic and how you are balancing short and long-term views? That's a great question, and why don't I ask my co-presenters to weigh in first?
I'll offer a couple of perspectives we've heard. One is obviously, particularly in healthcare, there are some concerns around being able to provide internships just because of the status of the hospitals and how much they want to expose people right now. So it's interesting because as we're developing curriculum, we're also looking for ways to achieve some of those requirements, internship requirements via sort of virtual solutions, in addition to trying to just cut down on the number of hours students may need to be in a hospital so they can accomplish the same end, but still be ready to go to work at the end of the certificate program. So that's the main one we've bumped into in terms of a friction with the fact that it's just an environment where they don't want to put too many people right now.
Paymon?
Yeah, I would just add that, I mean, Nivine's exactly right. Our hospital partners are sort of stuck in a catch-22. They still have a hiring need, but because they're triaging to serve COVID patients, they can't take on clinical rotations, which is necessary to get a credential for a lot of these entry-level jobs in hospitals. In general, I would say that in the short term, demand is still there for our employer partners, not just in healthcare, advanced manufacturing, for example, in Rhode Island and in Providence. CNC operators are a huge need for big companies like General Dynamics. And they're sort of waiting on the local partners that have training shops, the shop rooms at the local community college to open up. And they're sort of, waiting impatiently in some cases to open up these training programs. And so COVID has had a huge impact on the short term, but the long term still looks quite strong in sectors that were already growing.
For sure.
Melissa asks, can you talk about why you chose to start the program at the end of senior year? How would this model coexist or complement communities that offer high school CTE career pathways that could start earlier for students? That's a great question. And Paymon and I were both part of the New Schools effort in New York City, where, of course, there were whole schools that were career themed and credentialing focused, started hundreds of them. We really wanted to start, and I think where the future goes is something that there's still a lot on the table, but to start in a place that recognized that we didn't just want to get in and create or impose a new program on high schools, which are very, very complicated, very tightly wound, very efficient and economical, typically, organizations, and making the big ask of high schools to bring a fundamentally new program across grade levels, we felt like wasn't exactly the right place to start. But at the same time, we felt like there will always be kids coming out of high school who don't, for whatever reason, have an immediate next step or an obvious direction to move. And so we did have to dip into high schools. Paymon, you should certainly weigh in on this. And Nivine, obviously, you recruit from high schools around the country. But I would say we also realized that for some kids, they're going to very readily make that transition coming out of the high school course. For some kids, it maybe takes a little bit longer. And so we haven't at all said we're going to walk away from high schools. We think it's one of the things that makes us unique. And of course, what we're trying to do is to bridge high school with post-high school life. But on the other hand, we also can't ignore the many large number of kids who are beyond high school, even though they've graduated from high school, and who also are without direction and in need of this sort of bridge. And so we've made a decision to work with both populations, all young adults, some in high school and some recently out of high school. Paymon, anything to add to that?
No, I think you captured it well. It's as simple as a critical mass of need across the country for students who are in their senior year and don't have a plan. And the point is really well taken. As John mentioned, we've thought about how we can work with high schools that begin this kind of programming as early as 9th grade, and I think that's very much on the table. But there's just scores and scores of students, and from Camden to Louisiana to other parts of the country who need this level of post-secondary planning and support.
Yeah. Next question, and as you guys have questions, just please put them in the chat. Comes from my friend and colleague Kevin Teasley. Nivine, not too far from you, in Indiana, including Northwest Indiana. He asks, how is this funded? And I'm going to ask Nivine and then Paymon to talk about this, because I do think that this cannot work if it is just going hand in hand to every foundation around the country to try to fund it. There has to be a means of doing this sustainably and that's part of this project too. So Nivine, maybe you could start and Paymon add as well.
Yeah, well, so for us, like our undergraduate college, where we engineered the price down to make it work for underserved individuals, this is the same way, that we are funding this essentially through Pell dollars that are available to students, and a combination of that and philanthropic efforts. But our goal is to make sure that, once we build this out and get it scaled, that those Pell dollars pretty much sustain the program and sustain each credential as we roll it out. We know we're going to need philanthropic investment to start, but our goal is for it to be self-sustaining in the end. And I don't know if you want to add to it, Paymon.
No, I mean, that's exactly right. We think that this has to be fundamentally geared off of the Pell Grant to make it affordable for our participants, most of whom are low-income students of color. And so we have a revenue share arrangement with National Louis. We're dependent both on additional philanthropy to get the programs off the ground. We think in the longer run, there could be a role for employers to financially support the organization. I mean, certainly we are delivering on a significant need for them. I mean, even in the midst of a pandemic, as I mentioned earlier, there are hiring shortages for these middle skill entry-level jobs. And so we're not only solving that problem, but we're also diversifying their workforce and being a partner for them to engage more deeply in communities in which they are residing. And so I think that could be a big component to help get us to sustainability.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's been our model, and it's been our model with National Louis in particular, which is we're raising philanthropy to build a system that then operates sustainably on an ongoing and earned revenue basis, and that's the goal. So we're raising $6 million over 3 years with National Louis to get the structure off the ground, but that's an investment that's going to return at a much higher level because we are building it off the federal and state aid systems that already should support kids going through post-secondary education. And Kevin then follows up with the question of our high school kids benefiting from Pell. And the answer to that is sadly not in most places, no, although it is starting to happen in some places. But in our model, the high school course is just a course that kids would be taking anyways. It's a credit-bearing course that goes toward graduation. So schools are spending on the teacher that's teaching that kid just like they'd be spending on that teacher to teach something else. So it's actually it's in effect an in-kind contribution from school systems. Also fair to say we are starting to work with school systems that are funding some of this after the kid graduates. And Kevin, you and I work in Louisiana. There's a number of Louisiana school systems that are doing that now as well. And that feeds into a question that Lily asks, which is, what are the biggest policy supports or barriers you've experienced working in the states where you're working in? And Paymon, I'm going to jump in on a funding point there, but I'd be curious as to what your reaction to that is too. And Nivine, I'd be curious as to what you say about my response. I think the biggest barrier is the divide between workforce programs and credit-bearing programs in the community college environment, meaning that WIOA and federal workforce dollars fund a certain set of programs that don't grant credit toward larger degrees and aren't eligible for Pell Grants. Meanwhile, community colleges are operating a whole bunch of credit-bearing courses that generate Pell Grants, and they typically are for more conventional degree programs and so on. That's not true everywhere. There are places that are finding a way to bridge this, in my view, artificial gap, and I think Nivine is the leading president in the country on that issue, and that's why we're working with them. But I think that the fact that you have to kind of duct tape and bubble gum your way toward a degree program that is cheaper, faster, and more relevant economically is an enormous barrier, and it's idiosyncratic not just state to state, but institution to institution, and really even degree program to degree program. So you have to do the duct tape and bubblegum thing in every state where you work, every college with which you work, and then every individual program within those colleges. And in my view, that's the biggest barrier that we've encountered. But Paymon, I'd be curious what you say. And Nivine, I'm talking about higher ed again, so you should weigh in on what I've said. Paymon, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with your answer. And we started in our pilot year trying to work with workforce development boards, and it is not work for the faint of heart. It is brutal. It is political. It has more friction and inertia than most bureaucracies that you'll work with, and it's fundamentally decentralized. And so there is no per capita funding, public funding solution through workforce dollars, whereas Pell is a national, I mean, it's a national choice program, right? I mean, it follows the students and insofar as the choices they're making in higher education, and there's not an equivalent thereof in workforce, and there's no interaction with the higher ed system. There are no college credits one can get. Again, Nivine knows more about this than we do, so anything we left out?
I don't have anything else to add. I agree. It's an incredibly disjointed and unresponsive system that isn't keeping its eye on the prize of how we serve students to ensure that they can become contributing citizens that are able to be economically stable and move up the economic scale. So that's why I think we do have to set a new model. And I frankly think that once we demonstrate this model and start scaling it, it's going to transform higher ed and other systems overall as they recognize the impact that can be had when you do this right.
Let me name one more, just because there are a lot of policy people at this event, and ExcelinEd is a policy organization first and foremost, and this is a policy summit. So in response to Lily's question, I might name one more that I think doesn't get enough attention. And that is that in the way that the Pell Grants are applied, the summer following the senior year of high school is not typically thought of as a Pell eligible time. And because state aid systems are largely adders onto the Pell Grant system, they follow suit and don't really fund through their state aid programs. And I'm not talking about always, but very often, the summer after the senior year of high school, meaning that the assumption of the higher education financial aid system is that education starts the fall after you graduate from high school. And what I would say is that for many, many kids who are coming out and need to jumpstart their career and move ahead, it actually is that summer period after high school that is really critical to them moving forward. And I think states can do a lot to address this. I think if governors, legislatures, state boards of education were really focused on this issue, this would get solved. But the fact that it is very, very difficult to pin down how you finance a college education summer immediately after you graduate from high school is a real gap in the system as well.
I'd go further on a policy recommendation in that, look, if they, there's a lot of talk about increasing Pell. The fact of the matter is if you increase Pell, and particularly if you increase it for sort of rapid credentialing programs like this, and you end up with individuals who now are earning a sustainable wage, they will then arguably not need as much Pell for the rest of their education. So ultimately, it's not only cheaper for the government, it's also a more productive and empowering way for individuals to feel like they can sustain themselves and continue to contribute to their own continued education. But to keep it at such a low rate, I'd almost incentivize systems to increase Pell for short-term credentials because it reduces the burden on the system overall over time.
Really interesting. Yeah. And I guess, Nivine, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but it may be worth weighing in on some of the proposals that you've seen that are floating around the Hill right now. Not as much on the debt stuff, although if you want to go there, you're certainly welcome to. But more just on how people are thinking about Pell. And I think it has been striking to Paymon and me when we go to Washington and tell the story of Propel, how we really get a very partisan reaction. I think we weren't expecting that. And that's not to say that there's not value in the Republican perspective or the Democrat perspective, but there wasn't a clear consensus perspective on how the federal government can do more to finance a what you might call not the conventional higher education path. And that's been a deeply frustrating thing for us, I think, is not just that it doesn't exist today, but it's not clear where the political consensus is for it in the future. Does that resonate, Nivine?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of schizophrenia going on the Hill right now.
Yeah. All right, question from Melissa. How do you work with employers to determine the target occupations and aligned credentials in each region? Is there a wage threshold or other criteria? Paymon, why don't we start there? I know we've been down that, you start there. Why don't we've been down that road?
You're muted, Paymon.
Sorry about that. I thought I unmuted. So we do start with a baseline wage requirement. So it's kind of roughly $15 an hour is a starting point. We also then take into account opportunities to advance. So just stackability of the credential within an employer partner. And so healthcare was a really easy one, given you can do clinical work as a CNA or CMA and then eventually work your way to becoming a nurse. And there's sort of in between rungs as well, rad tech, surge tech, et cetera. And advanced manufacturing and the other sectors, work the same way. So, the guardrails are fundamentally around wages and upward mobility. And I'd say the last thing is the timeline for training. Everything we do is under a year long, and for the most part, they're in the 4 to 6 month range for attaining the credential.
Adriana asks, could you talk a little bit about how much you think the reauthorization of Perkins 5 and states' new plans is going to have on high quality in-demand credential attainment? I guess this kind of gets back to the role of Congress as a force for change within the system. Nivine, do you have a projection to make?
I'm not over my skis on that one. If you have something to say on it, go for it.
Paymon, I can certainly weigh in. You have thoughts?
That's all you, Mr. White.
All right. Well, I think obviously on the politics of it, I don't know. That being said, I do think that scarcity within higher education, dropping populations of college eligible people who are of conventional college age is going to force parts of the higher education environment. And you already see this obviously in a number of different ways to kind of get comfortable with programming that they might not have been comfortable with before. That's both a modality issue, an online issue that's obviously been kind of foisted upon us today, but it's also just a structural issue in terms of the structure of degree programs and so on. And I think you're seeing that obviously already. It's hard for me to imagine that Congress is simply going to be impervious to this, in my view, sizable movement toward kind of new types of models, shorter types of models, different sequencing of work and learning. And at the same time, there's a lot of orthodoxies and a lot of concerns about kind of third rails that can't be touched. I think there's a lot of for-profit politics. There's a lot of student loan politics. There's a lot of some of the struggles that the workforce system has experienced, and there's politics on both sides of that too. So I think it feels to me like the type of issue where there's such momentum that something will be done at some point, but there's a lot to wade through. And frankly, I think when I think about the Secretary of Education, for as much airtime as the K-12 issues are getting, testing and returning to school, it really is the Higher Education Act and WIOA that are more on the Secretary's desk than is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and on which they're going to either have to be very fluent themselves or they're going to have a really, really good team.
I also think the conversation needs to potentially adjust to stop talking so much about whether it's WIOA or this area or that bucket, but needs to talk about the significant and increasing national economic disparity that we're seeing. Because education is one of the key vehicles that can address that problem. And it's not just through four-year degree programs, it's through all these different types of short-term programs that get people economically stabilized. And I think if they turn the conversation to that, the solutions will start becoming a lot clearer.
Yeah, that is I totally agree with you. We have a misguided dialogue, and I think we need a reframe. I agree.
And that also removes it should remove it out of a partisan framework, because everyone recognizes this as an issue in order for our country to continue to thrive.
Next question from Lily. Being from Louisiana, I am curious what steps states can take to prepare their students for high-skill, high-wage jobs while retaining them over time from the drift toward other states that may seem to offer more diverse opportunities. Paymon and Nivine, I'm happy to weigh in on the issue of brain drain, although probably somebody from Louisiana should start that conversation.
Go for it, John.
I think governors should be doing what we're doing today. I mean, obviously, economic development is a part of it, and Louisiana, as an example, has long had a tourism and energy dependent, an ag dependent economy, and that's changed a little bit, but not enough. But look, I mean, it's a chicken and egg problem between economic growth and talent and educational growth, and to my mind, there is a lot of room left to go for governors and mayors who want to lead their cities and states in the direction that we're describing today, which is educational models that offer new value, and they may risk offending the kind of defenders of the old model. And that's just something that, and I'm not just talking about higher education, I'm talking about workforce, I'm talking about K-12 education. That's going to take governors leading. The good news is, when I think about, just to name a couple of them, Gina Raimondo in Rhode Island, Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, Jack Markell, formerly governor of Delaware, Bill Haslam, governor of Tennessee, Rahm Emanuel, former mayor of Chicago. There are people who have led, who are out there on this issue, and I think that we should and hopefully will see more of that. Governor Sandoval in Nevada comes to mind as another former governor who's an example of this. So I think it takes leadership. I think it takes imagination. I think it takes the willingness to say to people that there's going to be a more competitive landscape. But that's what's going to happen if you're going to both keep people in Louisiana and deliver them value so their careers stay in Louisiana. It has to be a new model. We've had a number of fantastic questions. We have a couple of minutes left, just a couple. If you have other questions, we can put them in the chat. Why don't we wait a little bit for more questions? Well, I think for our audience, it seems like Paymon and Nivine, our questions have been wrapped up. So I think we can end our time here. But I really just want to say to both of you that for me personally, this has been really a start to the most exciting and compelling and important part of my work each week and each day. And so I'm grateful to both of you for the chance to do it with you. And I appreciate you sharing your stories of our mutual project here together today.
Thank you, John. And I feel likewise with both of you guys. And thank you all for joining us today and hearing what we're doing.